This is Jonathan Lane from Fan Film Factor, and I am here today with Vance Major on what is, I guess, your 47th appearance on Fan Film Factor.
It's been a lot, man. It's been a lot. Yeah.
It's been a lot. Now, of course, the fact is he's been on so much because he's made, like, I don't know, 70, 80, 90, 170. I have no idea how many fan films you made at this point.
I actually had to count them up because I was doing an interview for another person. They were like, how many have you? And I was like, oh, let's count them up. I've done 79. That doesn't include all the special editions. That's just first run through films. If you include all the special editions, it's like 105, I think it is. First run films, 79 films. And that doesn't include cameos into other people's films like the Avalon Universe or the Valiant films or George Cayon's films.
Yeah, you were truly the Where's Waldo of Star Trek fan films. That was one of my first nicknames for you, and it's still just like, oh, look, there's Vance. Yeah, Menard.
Yeah, I get around, man, yeah.
Now, before we continue, I just want to deal with the elephant in the living room, or the Mugatu in the cave, as I like to say. For anybody who's been paying attention on Fan Film Factor many, many months ago, Vance and I had a little falling out. And as Vance said, it is now water under the bridge. So, yes, we have made up. Everything is good. We are moving on. We're best buds again. So anybody's wondering, yes, we're all good.
Yeah, we made up. With the whole COVID thing, it was time to kind of bury some hatchets and not in each other, but move on. So yeah.
Well, I missed hearing stories about Royce because your son is how old is Royce now? He's what, 3.5 now?
3.5. Yeah, he had one of our coworkers, one of Mona's coworkers at the nursing home that she works at. Her son, who's 4, came over and they kind of spent the day together and played. It was nice because, Mona used to take him out and, they'd go places like the rec center and the Discovery Center and, the parks and everything. And so Royce he's a very active kid. So staying home, you could feel the claustrophobia with Royce. He's like, I want to go. Me, I'm not active. My idea of active is move from the couch to the fridge, back to the couch, So Dad's not very active. But it was nice to see him kind of play with another kid, and it's nice, a kid his age, and it's fun to see Royce share all of his toys when, it was good, so.
Well, I'm glad he's getting a little normalcy and social ability into his life. For those who don't know, Royce is like the cutest kid in fan films. He's starred in a number, well, I don't know if he starred, he's appeared in a number of your Constar and Menard fan films. So.
Yeah, he is actually guided in Much Afraid. He actually guided me when we share the scene together, which is in the dream sequence in the beginning. It was important for me to have Menard in kind of a flash forward because of the quad lithium, him to share a scene with his son Eobard. So I told Royce, I said, okay, run around that direction and we'll go, we'll do it. And so Royce started running, then he stopped. He's like, no, Dad, you run that way, Dad, and I'll chase you. So he was well aware of the camera and what we were doing. So we did, and that's the take we used. So he's
ready to direct.
He's well. Oh yeah. Well, he actually in the film Sinking, the Constar is, and this is 23rd century Constar. I'm in the captain's ready room, which is where I film most of my stuff. He actually helped. We mix the chocolate syrup with the red food coloring, and at first he was kind of nervous because he thought it was real blood. And I said, no, son, it's chocolate. And so I tasted it, and he kind of looks at it, with, kind of peeking inside the bowl, and, he kind of dips his finger in and kind of tastes it, and he's like, chocolate. So he helps put it on my face, and then he ate the rest of the bowl. And then he actually held the flashlight in my face while I'm filming the scene. When I was done with each scene, I'd look over at him and I'd be like, shh, Daddy's filming. And then when we were done completely, I was like, all right, Royce, I think we're done, Turkey Butt, because I call him Turkey Butt. And I was like, I think we're done, Turkey Butt. And he looks at me, he's like, shh, Daddy's filming. So he's well aware of the filming process, So
so not only is he ready to direct, he's also ready to be a first assistant director, because that's the person who's sitting quiet on the set.
Yeah.
So that changes to shh, Daddy's filming.
That's exactly it.
Well, thank you for giving me the segue, because today I want to talk specifically about Much Afraid and Sinking, which are your 2 most recent Constar Chronicles releases, right?
Well, I have two more after that, but those are very short. Those are more Combox type stuff. One of them is called Fantastic Daily, and the other one is, I forget what it's called. That's part of the problem with making so many films, you tend to forget. But yeah, these segmented films are called Constar Continues. So it's no longer Constar Chronicles, it's Constar Continues, because I kind of wanted to do something a little different since I'm no longer in the 24th century, I'm in the 23rd century, telling some stories, that happen to take place after Bernard's valiant adventures. He's captain of the Constar in the 23rd century, and I'm wearing the brand new Pike uniforms, from Star Trek Discovery. So I kind of rebranded this chapter films, the Constar Continues. So yeah, but the ones I think you and I are going to discuss, which are more films rather than just shorts, are Sinking and then Much Afraid.
And those are considered Constar Chronicles or Constar Continues?
Constar Continues. All of these sets of films that I've done, which is Much Afraid, Sinking, Fantastic Daily, Missing Person. I think I've got about 10 films in this chapter, which were all done this year. They're considered Constar Continues. So,
okay, because the reason I was asking is that Much Afraid, much of it takes place during the 23rd century, and then you sort of go off on your sabbatical. I don't want to ruin it for well, actually, I'm going to ruin it for people because you should have watched it before you're listening to the interview, so just go and watch this thing. But you go on your sabbatical, and then, of course, you come back, and it's now the 24th century, so it kind of crosses over.
Yes.
And that was one of the things I want to talk about. But the thing I want to talk about first for these is these were both made post-pandemic, correct?
Yes.
Because I find post-pandemic fan films to be really fascinating because it's proof that not only are fan films, and Star Trek fan films in particular, not dead, but very much like the critters that survived the extinction of the dinosaurs and eventually evolved into man, you can't kill life. It just keeps going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny. And Star Trek fan films, obviously you can't get together with people unless you're basically filming a bunch of Breen who are all wearing helmets, because you can't social distance or wear a mask and still be in the Star Trek universe. So instead, what folks are doing, and this includes the guys in France who did that, it's called Horreur Post-Atomique, where it was basically living in the post-World War III era of Earth's history just before first contact with the Vulcans. And then at the end of that fan film, just as one of them is dying, somebody comes into his bunker, and it's the Vulcans along with the humans, and they're basically going and they're curing all the radiation poisoning all over the world. And it was a fantastic little fan film that these four guys from France who were friends with each other made in their own homes and then edited together. And then a couple of weeks after that, we had the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy Look Forward to the Day that came out from David Chang and Mike Longo with Jens Dombeck as Spock and Frank Jenks as McCoy. And they also recorded their pieces in their own homes in their uniforms, looking directly into their cameras, and edited that together. And now you've got these two Constar Continues episodes. Now, truth to tell, you actually had to jump on everybody else because most of your Constar Chronicles and Constar Continues stuff is already just people talking via subspace to each other.
I've got to be honest. When we had talked, when you and I kind of reopened communication with each other, you and I had a very long conversation, and that was one of the things you and I had talked about was I wish I could take credit and be like, yeah, I'm this wonderful genius and I had this all planned out and mapped out and this is a great deal. But I'm not that smart. This is already in the works and in the plan, and, it's just the way I do things. And it's just because of, I don't have the ability to go places and do things. And to me, it's always about the story, and it's always just two people talking. It's just the environment is the only thing that changes. So it could have been just as easily me sitting in the briefing room talking to somebody, or me sitting in a coffee shop talking to somebody, or the comm box. Like, the setting doesn't matter. It's just two people always talking. And so that's part of the beauty of being in what people have dubbed a VANCE film. So, for me, I had already had this written up and ready to go. A lot of them had already had the script already. So we were already gearing up to do this stuff. And when the pandemic had already kind of hit us, it was like, for me, it was business as usual. Nothing had changed.
Pandemic? What can't talk?
Yeah, nothing, I'm not that clever. So it's, I wish I could take credit and be like, yeah, I'm as good as, the other two films. Like, those guys, I really give a lot of credit to, because it's like, that's smart storytelling. That's just how I always do things,
Okay, so you're not a genius when it comes to making perfect pandemic fan films and adjusting everything, because you were already doing that anyway. But I want to ask you something about Much Afraid first. And
sure.
I think it also applies to several other of your fan films, I know, because I know you and we've chatted about this. But it seems to me, and feel free to respond to this and elaborate on it, that you use Star Trek fan films, creating Star Trek fan films, as a form of therapy. Discuss.
The thing about it is, like I said, you can take the basic gist of the story and the story will still work. Take the film, and I forget the name, so forgive me. It's the one where Menard, it's basically like an abuse story where he's it starts off and he's writing a note to his father, and he's sitting outside of a campfire. And it's basically, like, that whole story is, you could take the Star Trek uniform off of him, and it's basically an abuse story of a guy who's trying to deal with his abuse issues with his dad. Take the Star Trek uniforms off of him, and it's not a Star Trek fan film. It has nothing to do with Star Trek. It's just a guy dealing with issues of what he dealt with growing up. And it's just me venting about the stuff that I went through as a kid. And I use Star Trek fan films to express the way I'm feeling at a certain point. We all have ghosts of our past, and we all have ways of dealing with it. With Royce, I never wanted to be the type of father that my dad was. And when I was growing up, he was very abusive. My parents divorced, and I never got to know, a good side of him. He came to my wedding, and we then kind of started to bond. And I think he kind of got to know the man that I became. But then about 6 months later, he passed away. And it really sucked, because that, like last year, that he was alive and that I got to know that person, that was probably the closest that I ever came to knowing a dad. But at that point, I was already a man. And so as I sit here myself as a father, I look at my son, and it's like, I know everything that I don't want to be and everything that I do want to be. And I use these films to kind of help, deal with my issues instead of keeping the cycle and being an abusive father myself, because, a lot of people just keep the cycle going. They go through abuse, and then when they have a kid, they become abusers themselves, and, angry, and they smack people, and they yell at people, and they, and I don't want to be that type of person, and I have anger issues, I have a lot of built up anger, and I don't want to be that way toward my kid. I love my son, and I love my wife, and I'm not angry, but I have anger inside me. So I use these films to release that. And I think it's a very human story a lot of the times that I tell. And it's because of the stuff that I've gone through. So I don't see these stories as these are clearly Star Trek stories. No, they're just human stories that have Star Trek elements to them. And I think that's usually when Star Trek works best. The fan films that really annoy me are the ones that are trying to be so clever because they sit themselves in the Captain Kirk pose, and they have their Vulcan science officer, and they have their doctor stand right next to the captain, and he's a good old country doctor. And to me, it's like, that's not original. Tell your story. Tell me why I should care about your character, because I want to. Hell, I'm watching your film. Tell me why I should care. And that's what I do with my films. That's why when people say, oh, I don't care about these people, well, great. I don't care if you care or not. Like, this is for me, not for you. So don't watch it. So it's therapeutic for me. It helps me become a better person, and it helps me realize things about myself. So that's why when people sit there and they appreciate the films I do, it's like, great, thanks. I appreciate the watchers, you know.
So fan films is therapy. If one watches Much Afraid, you can kind of tell what was going on in the world when you wrote that. I'm guessing that was the whole, putting the Mexican kids into cages and such, right?
Yeah, it's I tried to be as subtle as I could, but it's there's a lot of frustration. You turn on the news and it's very dark and it's not very hopeful. And as an American, my family has a history of being in the military. My dad was in the Navy for 20 years. My uncle's in the Navy. My grandpa was in the Navy. Like my family's been in the military for as far back as I know. And as I look at the way things are now, like I'm not proud to be an American. It scares the hell out of me for my son. I'm terrified, and I can't look to the future and say, man, I'm hopeful. When I was a kid, there may have been things that were wrong, a little crusty around the edges, but at least you were proud to be an American. I can't say that now. And I really wanted to tell a story that was about that. And I always had the idea for Menard that he would leave Starfleet between the Star Trek 6 era and return around Star Trek Next Generation Season 1, because there's that gap between Star Trek, that we don't see hardly anything. You see bits and pieces like the Enterprise C, a little bit of, Picard with, getting stabbed in the heart, but, it's generally an unknown. And I really wanted that to be that way for Menard as well. Like, what happened? We don't know. You hear bits and pieces, but it's generally a question mark. So this was the story that I was like, why would Menard leave Starfleet? Would he get kicked out? Would he leave over being pissed off? Would he go search for a crew? Would he go search for someone he's missing? I don't know. So I left it very vague in most of the stories. In fact, the film setting the stage, he says, he left to go search for someone that he, was missing. I put that way back in the day because I always had the story sort of planned, but not specifically planned. And then looking around at the politics of the day today, I'm like, nope, I know exactly what I want. And the story kind of wrote itself.
So you had the script. I always kind of wonder what goes on in your mind when you have these scripts and you have all these friends. I mean, once again, it was a cameo fest. I've been in one of your movies, probably I think two of your movies actually, in cameos.
Yeah, so you've been in a couple, yeah.
So I know how that works, at least on my end. But how does that work on your end? You have all of these friends in the world of fan films, and I can't even count how many different folks in the fan film community you had in there. But I mean, you had Alec Peters in there, and you had George Cahan from Starship Antilles, and you had Gary Davis from Dread Not Dominion. David Chang was in there. I mean, pretty much, if you've watched the low-budget Star Trek fan film, even some of the high-budget Star Trek fan films, you probably saw somebody whose name that you know. So, first of all, how did you decide which of your buds were going to be in there? And then, what did you do to make sure that, first of all, they were all agreeable to do it? I'm sure they all were. And then that they did it the way you wanted them to do it.
I have an idea in my head of kind of what I want, like scene for scene, and I just ask them. And the thing about my scripts is I'm flexible enough to where I can always change the name and say, well, if they don't want to do it, I can change the name and it can be somebody else. Like my scripts are always vague enough to where I'm not held specific to a person. And I mean, not to sound callous, but like everybody's replaceable. When you work on a no budget film, you always plan for, okay, so-and-so didn't show up. So, okay, everybody just take one step over and, okay, now this is your part. Or we have to condense 3 people's parts to 2 people's parts and let's continue the conversation so it makes sense. So you really have to be flexible with, okay, this is who I wanted initially, but we have to change the name so it's this person now. Thankfully, I've kind of built up the credibility with my friends. And I don't even see them really as quote-unquote actors from other films, even though they do other films. I just see them as my friends. I'm like, hey, you want a small part? And I think the reason why most people say yes to me is the fact that I don't have super large scripts where I'm like, no, you have to do it this way. You have to be this way. You have to do it this way. And it's got to be I'm always like, hey, if you can just be in a uniform, whatever the background is, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. Like maybe your character's on vacation and he calls me, whatever the room is, if you just want to sit against a blank wall, it doesn't really matter. Like this is kind of what the scene is and you're just calling me. And so I care more about what's being said than what the dressing of the situation is. I don't really care.
That's true, because I did your guest appearance in The Phantom. I was sitting in front of my closed bathroom door between my two mirrored closets.
Yeah, to me, like, for your situation in that, I wanted you to sell the fact that you were releasing the quad lithium in that universe and that it was basically the equivalent of what Nero did with the Romulus star and all this stuff and blowing up the galaxy and whatnot. Like, to me, I wanted that galactic destructive level event in the mirror universe, and that's what I wanted. I wanted that to be sold. I wanted the character to sell that moment. What surrounded him didn't matter to me. I didn't care.
You know what I did? I took my lamp from my bedroom table, the end table, and I put the lamp on the floor by my feet. It was like, maybe calf high. And I took the lampshade off, and so it just like underlit me. So we turned off all the other lights, and then I'm just this underlit, like one of those campfire stories, when you
right
the flashlight at you. So I tried to give you as much as I could sitting in front of my bathroom door.
No, and that's part of the fun of like working on the low to no budget. You get to be creative, and the thing about working on my stuff is like I never say no, redo this. And there are some people where it's like, for me, when someone asks me to do something, I'm like, well, how do you want this done? And when they're like, oh, it's fine, I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I'll do it. And I love working for people like that. But one time of me, no, be specific, be like this, do this, no, turn your head this way, do this way, and I'm like, dude, I don't have time for this. I hate working for people like that. That just annoys the hell out of me. So I don't be like that. I'm thankful that they do it. So I want to be as welcoming as I can for the next time when I ask, they always say yeah. So I think that's one reason why people seldom tell me no. Usually if they can't do it, it's because of a timing issue or, they're like, hey, when do you need to buy it? I'm like, when works for you? Because I'm coming to you. I very seldom do I rush anybody. So all of them pretty much said, yeah. I don't think I didn't get anybody that I didn't want, thankfully, because they're all good people to work with. And I never work with anybody who's kind of a prima donna. I've been really blessed to work with some good people, like Nick Cook, Luke Sutton, Robert Hurd, from the more next generation era films. Those guys have appeared in some of my later films from the 24th century. It's like, man, I look at that and I'm like, how did I get so blessed to be working with these legends? That's just a huge blessing to have stories that you get to have those people in there. But I think if you look at every one of those people's screen time, they only really had like maybe a couple minutes each. So it's nothing where it's like they have to do something that was like super duper straining. It's just something that take maybe a half hour out of their day, 10 minutes out of their day, to film and then send it off. And I'm really easy to work with. So.
Yeah. The only challenge you gave me is that you needed camera shake because I was supposed to be on that was about to explode. And of course I can't shake the camera myself. I can't make it a selfie. So I had to have Jaden, my son, hold the camera. And I'd just gotten a new camera that weighs like, it's a handheld. It's a digital SLR camera, but it's heavy, and Jaden was only, I guess, 8, just turned 9 maybe at the time. And so he's holding the camera. We'd gone over how to shake it. You can't really shake it like a Polaroid picture. You can't shake it like an Etch-a-Sketch. You have to like literally just tiny, tiny movements of your hand. So, as we dialed it back and we trained him to do this, over the course of maybe about, 10 minutes or so, then it was time to record me. And all I had to do was do these lines that you had written. And it wasn't really bad lines. I mean, it was like maybe just 2 short paragraphs, maybe 6 sentences total. And I kept flubbing, and just like little flubs. And poor Jaden, who, has to shake the camera when I say a certain word, and he's shaking it just a little bit, but he's holding it up. And then I get to the end of it, and I flub a line like, oh, no, and we had to do it again. And by the end of, 10 minutes, his arms are so tired, and I'm letting him, put the camera down and shake it out and whatever. But I had no other choice. I needed to get this stuff done, and there's nobody else to hold the camera because Wendy wasn't going to do it. Anyway, so eventually I think we divided up into 2 separate paragraphs, 2 separate takes, so at least I wouldn't have to worry
Yeah.
about flubbing too much. But, Jaden gets credit for being the cameraman on that. Even so, I think, ultimately you're right. It maybe, was a half an hour, plus the time to set up the floor.
And that's one of the things also, I always try to tell the actors whenever I reach out to somebody new or someone that I haven't worked with in a while, I always try to reiterate, when you work on one of my things, I'm not one of those people that, I'm like, you stick to the script word for word. I don't like that because that's not the way I like to act, because what sounds great in my head may not sound good coming out of your mouth. And I do, when I'm here, writing the script, I do a lot of talking to myself. That's how I write. And, I just write down what I'm talking because it's easier to go through the script doing it that way. But, again, what translates well coming from me may not translate well coming from you. So I don't mind if people kind of paraphrase or if they get the gist of it, An example is, say I'm in the captain's chair and you're sitting at Sulu Station and the lines are supposed to be, I say report and you say, Captain, the warp core is offline. And I'm like, okay, all hands abandon ship. And that's the way it's supposed to go. But say we're actually filming it and I say report and you say the warp core is going critical. And I'm like, okay, all hands abandon ship. I don't mind the fact that you changed it slightly because you still got me to where I needed to go. I can still say all hands abandon ship. The whole point of the scene right there is all hands abandon ship. That, I don't mind that. To me, that's a usable take and I'm completely happy with that. What I'm not okay with is if I say report and you're like, the transporters are offline. At that point, I'm like, cut. What are you doing? You know what I mean? So I give people enough freedom to read the script and say, okay, we're in this dance together. Do I need to change this slightly? Word for, what words can I use to be myself and still get you to where you need to be? You know what I mean? Of course, there's some words that still need to be the same. Like if I say quadlithium, it's not trilithium, it's not dilithium, it's quadlithium. So there's some things that have to stay the same. But, use your words. Make it you, because it's you that I hired for the part, so be yourself, you know what I mean? And I think that's something that not a lot of people do. A lot of people are, they're a stickler for stick to the script, and I just don't do that. So when I ask someone to be in a Vance film, it's whatever background you want, or if I need a blank background, hey, blank background, and then stick mostly to the script, but, however you want to do it, I don't care. I'm easy to please.
Well, moving on from Much Afraid to the other recent one, which was Sinking, and I could never say the word sinking without remembering this funny award-winning commercial from Europe, a couple of decades ago. And there's this guy in a lighthouse, and he hears on a radio. Have you seen this commercial?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, he's there in a lighthouse. It's European or whatever. So this Mayday comes in over the radio and goes, Mayday, Mayday, please help us. We're sinking, we're sinking. And the guy goes, hello? He goes, help us, please. We're sinking, we're sinking. And the person looks completely confused. And finally he says, what are you thinking about? And it cuts to need to learn English.
Oh, Lord.
And it was basically this English lessons company. But
wow.
Anytime I ever see the word sinking, it's like, what are you thinking about?
Good God.
And now you're going to see the same thing. And by the way, if you just go to YouTube and just do commercial, what are you thinking about, and see what happens, it's got to be on there. Hysterical commercial. So anyway, when I saw Sinking, I just saw this European guy with some kind of German, Dutch, Norwegian accent. What are you thinking about?
No, the names that I came up with for some of these films, like this one, like Much Afraid, and then Sinking, both of those were from a group. They were songs from a group. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They were a Christian group called Jars of Clay back in the day. And I loved those songs, so I was like, I'm going to name the titles of my films of this segment from those. Just like Fantastic Daily. That was actually a YouTuber that I used to watch back in the day, and he no longer YouTubes. And I was like, man, I really dug his stuff because he used to do these Black Eyed Kids stuff. And I was like, dude, I really love that. And everybody thought he was legit, real, finding these Black Eyed Kids stuff. And it turns out he was just kind of trolling the internet and stuff. And I was like, oh man, he got me too. So I named my film that. And just like if you go back to the Constar Chronicle films, like a lot of those films are like news programs. So like I have the tendency whenever I hear like a really cool name on like a song or a program or something, I'm like, oh man, I got to take that 'cause that's a really cool name because I'm not that creative. So I'm like, oh, I got to use that, you know. So yeah, that's where I came up with the names from. But
I love titles for things, you know, and your fan films. I mean, obviously when you get to do 79 fan films, you're probably going to start running low on titles, right?
You would think so, but there's so many songs, and like that's where I got Nausea from, because like I was listening to the artist Beck, like I love their song Nausea, and I was like, man, it was on repeat one night on a shutdown night, and I was like, man, I was writing the script, and I was like, oh, that would be a perfect title for this film, so that's why the film Nausea is Nausea. So yeah, no end of titles for me, my friend. So as long as there's titles, there may be endless fan films for me. So you know.
You see, I only had to worry about one title. You know, interlude. That's my one thing. So funny story. When Alec first, when I sent him the script, because you know, obviously he's got to read, you know, the part of Garth. He's going to play Garth, and I sent him the script, and he texts me, and he says, you got to change the title of the fan film. Now, for me, Interlude was perfect because the other title, the original title of the comic book, was Stardate 2245.1, and that is not a name of a fan film that's going to just roll off your tongue. And I thought Interlude was great because you've got Prelude and then Interlude, which comes between Prelude and the other Axanars, and then an Axanar. So this is the Interlude. It sounds like Prelude. And Alec texts me, says, you got to change the name of your fan film. I'm like, why? He said, because it's too close to Interlude. And I said, dude, that's a feature. That's not a bug. I said, that's on purpose, you know, because it's supposed to be like literally starting right after Prelude. Prelude ends a second later. Interlude begins. It's supposed to sound like Prelude. He's like, oh, okay.
Wow.
But he was like so urgent when he first said, dude, you've got to change your title. It's too close to Prelude. People will get confused. I'm not going to get confused. It's an immediate sequel. So anyway, but that'll be the only time I have to worry about titles. So let's talk a little bit about Sinking, because that's your other post-pandemic production, a little alliteration there. So you wrote that script, and then you contacted your friends, and they all did their stuff in, like, the dark?
No, we actually did that at work, and I maintained, of course, the distance that I needed to be away. So they actually did it in the back of my wife's RAV4 here at work. Because initially, when you see us, you could do a lot of kind of like forced perspective. When he's walking up the rocks, it looks like he's close to us, but he's not. Like when he's scanning with the tricorders and whatnot. Initially, we were all supposed to be there on the first day, and everybody didn't show up, except for the guy who plays Cherico and then the cinematographer and myself. So I was like, well, let's still just shoot something because I'm not leaving here without some type of footage. So we still social distanced, you know, kept our distance from each other, whatnot, and figured out what we would need to do for the stuff. But initially, like the shuttle pod conversation was all supposed to happen on the planet. We did the same thing during George Cayon's film. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but when we're on the planet, that's actually outside my house, because outside my house is a bunch of woods, which I've used a few times for alien planets. Like when we beam down to the planet in George's film, like we're not anywhere close to each other, and there's enough distance between us to where we're not, you know, at risk of getting COVID from each other. Plus, we all work at the same plant. We get tested, temperature checked, whatnot. So we're relatively safe.
For those folks who don't know, Vance works in a meatpacking plant. So you are an essential worker because if you don't work, I don't eat.
Yeah, pretty much. And the thing is, like, we're not a slaughterhouse. So we're not crammed, packed in like they were at some of the slaughterhouses that were out there in the very beginning. Like this plant, a couple people have asked when they've seen me on physical interviews that I've given, online, they're like, why are you wearing a mask? I'm like, well, this is why. And then I explained to them the plant that I work at and whatnot. And they've done a heck of a job keeping us safe with the sanitation stuff that they do and wiping everything down very, very consistently. The masks that we have to use, the face shields that we have to use, the PPE that we have to have, keeping the social distance between each other, the temperature checks when we come in, the hand sanitations we all have around, not to mention when they're actually on the floor, the stuff that we have out there. Like it's I feel very safe here. That's why when people talk trash on meatpacking plants, it's like, yeah, I don't know about the other places, but as for this one, like our facility is top notch. So that's why when we went to film, I was like, yeah, I feel very comfortable with the social distancing. I feel very safe filming what we were filming, especially keeping the same social distance between each other. But no, when we filmed the escape pod scenes, I still held the camera because they didn't know exactly how to do it. We filmed that in my wife's, the back of her RAV4, and I brought my, if you look at it, you can tell what it is. It's the backboard for my ready room, just put behind them. And then I built kind of like a banner for each of the escape pods. It's not a very good one, but it was the best I could do on my paint program. And then, they just sat in the back of the RAV4 and, while I'm 6 feet away recording them. So we were still able to social distance while we were filming those things. So, yeah.
It's really funny because they do look very crammed. I mean, that's the beauty of it. I was wondering if they were filming it in their own homes or whatever, how they did that. But no, the back of the RAV4 is brilliant. Was that at night, by the way? Because you worked a night shift. You worked overnight. So was that like a night?
Yeah, we did it all on our breaks. And then I think one of them was when they were getting off work or maybe, all of them were on our breaks. So we were all, for any one of my bosses listening, we were well off the clock. But no, we
and film on your coffee break. That's just that's fantastic.
Yeah. No, we've done that a couple of times when we've been on break. I'll be like, hey, come over to my office when you can, and we'll get a sound bite for a computer. And they're like, okay, hey, what are you doing, real quick? And they'll be like, nothing, just take my break. I'm like, hey, come in, we'll get this sound bite for your character's voice. Okay, at this point, like whenever they're on break, that's when we'll go do something because everybody knows that hey, we're gonna go make a film, so good times.
That is dedication to your craft. You and all of your coworkers there. How many meatpacking plants do you go to where you get to film a Star Trek fan film?
Right. No, and that's the thing. Like all the cardboard that I get, because we recycle all the cardboard that we use, and so like the backboard for my ready room and all the sets that I'll be building for the sets that I'm doing that are in my den, they're just recycled cardboard that I'm getting from the plant instead of throwing into the recycle bin. They give me some of the parts. That's what I had for the, if you look at the film Command Decisions, you actually see the full ready room. And that's what I did with just the scraps cardboard that I had and what I continue to use to this day and what I'll be doing with breakaway sets for, that I'm going to be doing here. August 1st, I'll be actually going to paint. So, I mean, this place is a great place because we're so flexible on as long as you get your work done and you don't do, the wrong stuff, do the stuff on your break and go back to work, and they're very accommodating. I love this company. It's a great company.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, I know that you are in the process of creating new sets for Constar in your home because basically that is the USS Constar is whatever particular room in your home has the most cardboard in it. But you recently started taking all of the stuff out of one of your rooms to transform it. How is that process going?
I've got everything out of it was my den, my man cave that I've had for 13 years now, 13 years. And, it was a little bittersweet because, as I'm taking down my action figures from my walls and my posters that I've had up for forever, the big poster I had of Jenna Jameson that was on my wall, I was like, oh, I'm going to miss you, girl. So it's good. I have everything off my walls that I need off. I've got the styrofoam that I need for the decals for the 23rd Century hallway. I've got some stuff for crew quarters that I need for different crew quarters. I've got some stuff for bridge stations that I'll need for when I do go for bridge stations. I've got my captain's chair already built from the Melbourne. That's been sitting there for years. I've never thrown that out. So, whenever I get all the paint, which should be this coming weekend, I should be ready to go by August 1st to start painting. And my niece will be coming over because she's never really painted. So I asked her, I said, hey, you want to come over? Because, I don't care if you mess up. So, it'll be good practice for you. And then Royce will do what he did last time with the ready room and kind of help paint, except this time he'll actually have some paint on a brush, So, again, if he messes up, no big deal. And then I'll grab some pool noodles, paint those, use those for the hallway too, because they had thin tubes in TOS. So I'll just use pool noodles, paint those. And you'd be surprised that you can just, once you're on a TOS set and you get a good close look at some of those things, you're like, oh, well, I can't do this, but I can do this, and repaint it and purpose it and put it up. So I think it's 54 cents at Walmart. Grab 2 of those, put it up. And the thing about it is, like, you put a little bit of Velcro on each side of the noodle and then put Velcro on the wall, and then you put it up. And then when you're done, you need to change rooms, just take it down. Breakaway sets are so easy. I've been doing kind of almost a daily log on my YouTube channels, just showing people how easy it is and then what some of the stuff that's going into the process. And it's kind of a slow process just because I'm taking my time. I'm in no real hurry just to get there. But it's just stuff you have lying around the house that you can do for this, on the cheap, because I'll never be elaborate like the Neutral Zone or Warp 66. Those guys that's the go-to sets, But for me, I can fake a lot of the stuff that I've seen, and for my purposes, have fun doing it. So,
well, there is one thing you have to do with the noodles, though. This is
What's
an imperative. You got to get a series of white vinyl letters that you can stick onto things. I'm sure you've seen them. They're like Michaels and whatever. You can get, white sans serif letters that you can stick on stuff like, a window, a car window or something. Anyway, on one of the pipes, you have to put GNDN.
GNDN?
GNDN. On Star Trek The Next Generation, they had GNDN pipes. And GNDN stood for Goes Nowhere, Does Nothing.
Goes nothing. I might have to do that. I might have to do that.
In fact, this very funny story at Star Trek The Experience, they had a walkthrough of Star Trek The Experience where you could actually pay extra money in Las Vegas, this is back when it still existed, and they would actually take you underneath the rides, when you go into the shuttlecraft, the hangar bay and under the Borg invasion, they would just sort of take you behind the scenes. And I did that at one point, and you weren't supposed to take pictures, but I snuck a picture because there was one of the pipes that said GNDN, and I just wanted to have a picture of that. And I took a picture of it, and the guy caught me taking a picture, and he made me delete it from my camera. I almost got put in Las Vegas Star Trek jail. I was like, oh, man.
You got put in the brig, huh?
Oh, almost. If they actually had one, they might have done it. I don't know. It's Las Vegas. Of course, the thing about the brig, it probably has a slot machine in it. But
if I do that, I'll send you a picture of mine, so at least you'll have that picture. So
yes, GNDN just goes nowhere, does nothing. That's the inside joke. That, and make sure that something has the number 47 on it.
Right on, man.
All right. So as we come to the end of our interview, because I know you have to go pretty soon, what is coming? Obviously, you're starting to create a whole bunch of sets. So any time that I've talked to Vance in the past where he says, I am basically done with fan films, I'm getting out of it, I quit, we just don't believe you anymore. So now you're making these elaborate sets in your home. So I guess you're here for a while. What can we expect in the future from Constar and Vance Major?
I'm working on a film called The Pretender. It's basically kind of my take on Mirror Mirror. It's kind of a project that George Kyan and I are doing. It's 2 versions of the same story, sort of. Mirror Menard is in the regular universe, and regular Menard is in the Mirror universe, and it kind of concludes his storyline that he was doing because of the whole pandemic. He was kind of putting his stuff on hold, and so I had told him, I said, hey, since you're kind of on hold at the moment, I've got the 23rd Century Constar crew, and we're able to still tell some stories if you need. So we kind of did some crossover stuff, and that's why we did the last film of his, made an appearance in that one. So we have a couple things down the road for him. But mostly it's doing the sets. I really haven't locked anything specifically. Once COVID ends, which, who knows when the sky will stop falling, of course I'll be going back to the sets. Hopefully Alex's set will still be available to me. We still plan on it being, and that's something I plan to do whenever everybody's money situation is good and everybody's healthy. I plan to go back to Warp 66 Studios to film. As far as I know, they'll still have me. Again, who knows where we're going to be when everything stops spinning out of control. I've got things in the work. I've got scripts written. What we had planned before is still there, waiting for us to come back to it, but I'm not in any rush to get there. As for my sets, honestly, I think I'm using them more as, when we did the Ready Room originally, it was more a project for me and Royce. And when Royce and I took a couple days to kind of build them, paint them, cut the pieces out we needed, and then Royce went to bed, the next morning when I went to wake him up before I cooked him breakfast, I said, "Hey, Royce." And then I opened up my den door, and then he saw the set completed, and he was so amazed, and he ran around the briefing room table, or, the captain's ready room table, and he was just like, wow, because in his mind, this is a spaceship. In my mind, that's kind of what I'm doing with these. It's more important to do this project and then, show Royce, hey, we've got a spaceship right here. To me, that's more important and more fun than, hey, we've got to do this so we can tell a story. I'm not really focused on the telling the story part, although there's a couple ideas, but I'm not really locked into anything right now. I'm just more excited to just build some sets and have some fun, and if something turns out great, awesome. If it doesn't, that's okay. I have some projects with some people that if it works out, great. One project I am working on is a planetary step, and that's with my friend Eric, and that's an Orville fan film. I will be a semi-regular guest on that. As you remember, I made the very first Orville fan film, and then he made the second one, and everybody thought he had made the first one, and then it was brought to light that no, Vance did. And he was like, what? So he reached out, and we started talking, and he was like, well, dude, I kind of want you in my film. And I was like, dude, I'd love to. You had the heart of Orville in your film. I'd love to do it, and he's such a cool dude, really on point with his storytelling and great characters. And with what I've seen so far of his stuff, it's just really good. It's the heart of Orville, and it gets you excited for story stuff. That's something that I'll be doing. So as for my own personal films, I honestly can't say. I'm not going to arrogantly say, I'm done with fan films, because obviously I'm not. I'm just, as you know, I used to do the chain maintenance here at the plant. But I've stepped away at the beginning part of June to kind of spend more time with my family, with Royce. We go over to my brother and sister-in-law's house on Sundays and spend more time with family. And I really do have a sense of family. Ever since this COVID thing had hit, the films just don't mean quite as much. Spending time with the family does, and doing the projects with Royce, like building the sets with him and doing fun stuff with him like that, means a little bit more. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens and what we got coming. So, who's to say?
Who's to say? Now, it sounds like you're doing it in a great way, and Royce is... Yeah, I mean, how much fun is it that your dad builds spaceships? Once he can go back to school and talk to his friends and say, my dad's building a spaceship in our living room.
I'll tell you, Jonathan, today when him and his friend Connor were playing, Connor picked up the Enterprise D. And as you know, I used to chase Royce. Royce would pick up his Enterprise D and I would pick up the Klingon Vorcha-class cruiser, and we would chase each other, playing tag. Well, he still has it on the shrunk, in the living room. And today, Connor picked up the Enterprise D, and Royce picked up his Vorcha-class cruiser, and they started playing with those ships. And I tell you, as a geek father, I've never been more proud. So I tell you, man, I'm just taking it one day at a time, and especially with the whole COVID thing going on, I'm just enjoying everything, and I'm in no rush to get anywhere. But there's definitely going to be more stuff coming. I'm just enjoying everything around me, so...
Well, that's what you should be doing. So everybody else, learn a lesson from Vance. Do what Vance does. Enjoy your pandemic. Make your Van films when you can. We'll be waiting for them. And in the meantime, I want to let you know, Vance, and all of my listeners, that Constar Chronicles and Constar Continues will have a couple of more audio interviews coming in the next few weeks, as I have my Tale of Two Constar Gregs back-to-back interviews. I don't know, Vance, if you remember, but you recommended that I interview both Greg Teft and Greg Mitchell, which I did a few months ago, and I've had those interviews sort of waiting for things to start slowing down a little bit to use, but I want to finally get those out because they're two really, really good interviews with two of your minions, I suppose. We call them.
Good guys, man.
Good guys, really good interviews. So, stick around for those in the next few weeks. Anyway, Vance, thank you very, very much for chatting with us tonight, actually.
No, it's my pleasure.
It's midnight for me and 2 o'clock in the morning for Vance, in case anybody's wondering.
Well, it's my pleasure, man. And you be safe, all right? And keep your young one and your wife safe, man, all right?
Yep, right back at you, my friend.